What was it like when I grew up? Well, I remember until I was 8 years old. We lived in the Bronx, 181st Street. We lived in an apartment building on the fourth floor, no elevator, so you had to walk up. Uh, Everything we did, we had to go walk to because my mother and father didn't drive, and I had four sisters, so that my mother and father were super busy. And my father worked two jobs, and my mother didn't work at the time. Um, I remember at that time, till 8 years old, we were always like a little scared. Everybody in our building had been robbed, but us. We were the only family that hadn't been robbed in the building, and even people in the hallway were mugged because it was a bad neighborhood. And people didn't have any money, so people were trying to, I mean, it wasn't that they were terrible; they just wanted money. Okay, but the one story that it's probably, I mean, my family has maybe 20 different stories because there was a lot of close calls because, like I said, it was a very bad neighborhood. When you entered the building, my mother would be watching out the window, and you couldn't be outside by yourself. I never went outside as a kid without my mother or father, and my sister never did either. My other sisters were older, so they actually, it was a better neighborhood when they were younger. But when we were younger, we weren't allowed outside at all by ourselves. So we kind of were like prisoners of our apartment. We never were able to go anywhere. So the one story is everybody in our building was getting robbed or mugged in the hall. And our next door neighbor, who was an older lady, maybe 60 years old, she was coming back from the food store with her, they all had these metal pull carts, and they'd have to pull them up the stairs because it would hold all the bags. I've probably seen them in the supermarket, but that's what they had in the city because most people didn't drive. So she was coming home, and this kid jumped her in the hall and took her pocketbook. Knocked her down, took her pocketbook, and ran away. And then inside of her pocketbook was her phone number and all her stuff. So that day, there wasn't much money in there because she just had come back from the food store. So that day he called her and said, "Listen, I have your driver's license, all your cards, and I'll sell them back to you for, $50 or whatever." And then she came and knocked on my mother's door, and just so happened that my father was home. Because he never was really hardly ever home because he worked two jobs, but he was home that day. And he went down to the hallway when the kid came in, and he grabbed the kid by the throat and put him up against the wall. And he said, "Don't ever come back in this building again." And he took the pocketbook, and the kid ran away. The kid was like 16 years old, So he was scared easily. He wanted money, So my father gave the pocketbook back to my mother, and everyone was like, "Oh, yeah, that was so brave of you," and everything. But meanwhile, now my mother, who had to pick us up from school and walk down there, was scared out of her mind because they lived across in the next building, all these guys. And they were always hanging out, because they didn't go to school. They just were always hanging out in the corner. So my mother comes, we go to Catholic school, we go up the hill, because we couldn't go to the public school, it was too bad. So we go to the Catholic school up the hill. My mother would always come and walk up and pick us up. So one day I come outside, I'm like seven years old, and I remember it, and this lady comes up to me and goes, "Joey," she's got a blonde wig on with glasses and a kerchief over her head. So nobody who would know who she was, because she was afraid she was going to get mugged by the people across the street for retaliation. So it wasn't too long after that. I mean, there's some other stories after that, but that was one of the main ones. Well, my mom was too scared to even pick us up because she felt those people were after us after that. And, well, we don't really talk about your past unless somebody asks you the question, you know what I mean? And, I mean, other than we didn't know we were having, a bad life, really, because we had a nice, beautiful family. We had love. We had mother and father, and I had four sisters, and, we all looked out for each other. Not me so much because I was little, but, they all watched over each other. So it really wasn't that bad, and we don't really talk about it. And then when we moved to Glenrock, it was like a whole different world. I mean, when we were moving out of New York City, when we were carrying the furniture up and down the stairs, someone stole the battery out of the rental truck. in between walking up and down the stairs. I mean, it was a matter of 15 minutes. But when you move to New Jersey, and people don't even realize like how lucky they are, like living in the suburbs here. It's like you don't have that fear of, that constant fear of you might get hit over the head or you might get mugged. You know what I mean? Because everybody here is just pretty much on the same kind of wavelength. You know what I mean? The same kind of status, I guess. I mean, we always had our doors locked. We had like 10 locks on the doors. And we went to New Jersey and it's like no one even locks their door. We're like, what, are you crazy? Well, when we moved to Glen Rock, like I said, it was totally different. Very beautiful town and felt safe. That's a key part of life is you feel safe. Like, it's different for you guys, and I always try to teach you guys. You always have to be aware of where you are and, like who's around you, and you always have to be sitting so you're facing everybody with, because that's the way that we grew up. You had to be alert. And I know for a fact, because when you start feeling safe all the time, that you don't do that. So I always tried to teach you guys how to do that. And then when I went to Glen Rock High School, right out of high school I met Mom. Mom was from Hawthorne, and we met at a party, and we started going out. And then we went out from the time we were 18, right out of high school, right after high school. Went to college together, to Bergen Community College. We drove together every day. And then we got married at 22. So we've had a wonderful life here in Hawthorne. We have great kids, super duper kids. Thanks you, Mikey. Joey was the first. We had him when we were 25 years old. I remember thinking when he was born that how the heck am I going to do this? I'm totally responsible for this person now. And it was like really a little scary, And I guess I did pretty good because he's all grown up and he's doing well. And I thought the same thing when you were born. I'm like, oh, here we go again. I'm totally responsible for this one. And doing very good, Mike. I'm very proud of you. Well, how my life would be different from if we had stayed in the Bronx to moving out here was night and day. Like, who knows what I would have turned out to be if I stayed there. I mean, it was a terrible neighborhood, I mean, there were drugs on the streets and stuff like that. And this is back when I was a kid. I can imagine what it is like now. I mean, people were afraid to go into the building. I mean, I could be not even alive if I stayed in New York City. I don't know. I could have, maybe I would have turned out to be rich. Who knows? You don't know what you would have turned out to be. But moving to Glen Rock was the best thing my father and mother could have did for our family, because they put us in a safe place to grow up and to get a good education. And I don't think they could have did a better job. They hardly could afford it, but somehow they were able to swing it, and they were just great parents to do that.